Hey guys, Ben Whipple here with Opal Delights. I've had several people in the last few days ask me how to cut a cabochon properly. Just as a beginner's class, I was going to do a cabochon cutter 101. So I took a piece of rhodochrosite here. This is a rough stone. I'm going to go ahead and show you how to cut this and how to get a really good shape on it without having it all butchered up. What you're going to want to do to first start out, I took the liberty of flattening the bottom and drawing the shape that we're going to go for on there, an oval cabochon. What we're going to do now is we're going to cut all this excess rock off up to the line of the oval cabochon that we want to keep, but we want to keep that at a 90-degree angle as best we can. Um, and you want to just basically have a straight up wall all the way around that. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this excess rock off, and then I'll show you where we go from there. Okay, guys, we now have our cabochon preform done. I got the walls going up roughly at a 90 degree. They're in a little bit, but that's all right. We're going to cut that down anyhow. But it doesn't have to be perfect. This is just a rough form and a good way to help you shape it. You want to make sure you do stay within the lines and don't cut into your black line there. You want to cut right up to it, and that's the difference. Um, if you're doing this with a lapidary machine like I was, you're going to have your different wheels. So you're going to be moving up. I started with the 80 or 180 grit wheel to get the big chunks off. Then I moved to the 220 grit wheel. And then I went to the 280 grit wheel just to smooth it out. But then I came back with the 220 and kind of roughed up this edge. And you'll see why in just a minute. Then I also went through and kind of flattened the top out. Some people like the higher dome cabs. That's all right if you do. Just make your stone a little bit taller, and this technique will still work perfectly for that. Just make sure you don't cut into the line when you're cutting your cabochon, because that'll make it look really weird when you're done. But this is a way I learned to cut back in a rock club that I was in Anaheim, California. There was a guy named Herb Beckman. He's since passed away, bless his soul. But he was an amazing cutter, and he taught me this technique for cutting cabochons and getting them the right shape and everything like that. He was an amazing cutter, and he kind of ran the rock club there. Um, and he always cut really, really awesome belt buckles. And he never sold them, he always gave them away to someone, and he'd spend 2 or 3 months cutting a belt buckle. But it was probably the most beautiful stone you ever saw cut. He was really awesome at cutting stones and just very patient and really good guy, bless his soul. But he taught me this technique, and this is really just the best way to get a good shape on your stone without um, just free forming and getting some weird chunky piece of jewelry going for you. So what we're going to do, we have our shape, we have our height for it, and then we've flattened out our top a little bit. So we're going to take our fine tip Sharpie, and on the very top of it, you're going to draw a little circle around, but you're going to leave, uh, you know, basically kind of if you were making a donut. So whatever shape you kind of want your donut hole in the middle. Let me see if I can get my Sharpie to work here. Okay, so then you get your kind of donut. You want to stay as close to the edge as you can, as equally to the edge as you can. So as you're going around the shape, and it doesn't matter if it's scratchy, this is a line that you're going to cut up to. So you want to stay about as equally to the edge as you are all the way around the stone. If you mess up, you can just make it a little wider. It doesn't have to be perfect. This is just a guideline. And then right in the center of that, we're going to take a line and draw a line straight down the center of that. Just like that. So it looks kind of like a belly button. Then we're going to take around the edge. I just take my Sharpie and put it perfectly at, its rolling side. Sometimes you can tilt it down a little bit if you want it to be a little lower. I think with this, we're going to tilt down a little lower because I have this edge that's a little bit close there. So we're going to tilt it down a little bit, and then you just hold the Sharpie to it and just twist your stone and just keep it flat on the ground there or on the table. And we're just drawing a line perfectly around it. All right. So the point of this, you've got your shape, you've got your halfway mark line, and then you got your donut up top, right? So what we're going to do now to get this shape going the right way is you're going to cut off basically an angle from, let me do it here so you can see. You're basically cutting off from this line straight up to this line. So anything in between here and this line, you're going to basically go through at an angle and just kind of cut that off. And you're going to go all the way around. You're going to keep one side of your blade here and the other side here. So you're basically cutting off a perfect angle all the way up to the outside of your donut hole. All right. And then once you get that done, you're going to go from this center line again to your center line in the middle of your donut hole. So I'll take off the edges of this first part, and then I'll show you again what we look like. Okay, guys, we've cleared off that first corner edge. And you can see we're starting to get the shape of a cabochon, right? You got your straight up part here. Then we're curving in. Usually you want to keep this at like a 35, 45 degree angle. Usually 35 is, I think, the number they say. But then you got a little flat top up here still where your donut hole is, right? So we want to get rid of that because you don't want a flat top on your dome, obviously. So what we're doing now that we've cut up to the outside of the donut hole and our middle line, now we're going to cut from our middle line up to the center line. Now you obviously don't want to make that a point. So what you do in the meantime with it, If you have wheels, you want to roll your stone. And when you roll your stone back and forth, that's what's going to help you get that rounded point on it. If you're just using like a Dremel, I would suggest cutting in at an angle, maybe even doing, if you need to, draw another line here on the halfway from your halfway point, do a 3/4 line, and then maybe cut to your center line from the 3/4 line, and that would help you get the rounded curve a little better. Um, so that would be one way to do it with the Dremel. But really, what we're doing now, since we got to the outside of the donut hole, is we're just trying to round off the top. So an easy way to do it is to just roll your stone back and forth, and that will actually do it properly, and it'll kind of keep it all evenly round. And you're going to do that anyhow at some point. Once we get this part rounded, then we're going to go back, and you don't want a cabochon with straight up walls, because if you're trying to bezel that, it'll never stay inside a ring or a pendant or whatever. So it'll just fall right out. So your corners have to, or your edges have to be tilted in a little bit. So we're going to go back and basically blend those from there basically up to your midpoint here. But I would suggest, maybe even if you need to and it's still difficult for you, I would say draw a 3/4 line. And then from your 3/4 line, you could go from the 3/4 line to the number one in the middle, and that would help you round your top off. And then you would go basically from the bottom up to your 3/4 line in order to blend your first line from the bottom. And eventually you're going to want to get all that up. But let me throw this back on the machine and we'll round off this top. I'll do it just according to the drawing here. And I'll show you what it looks like once you're all done with that. And then we can go back and kind of blend the edges. And I'll show you how to make a perfect cab. Okay, guys, we've blended our top now. Basically took out the donut hole and the center line by rounding it. And you can see it's still kind of lumpy, but that's because I'm still on the 280 grit wheel, which will leave your stone looking like that. But that's still a really good shape. It's pretty even. The best way to tell if your stone is even is to just look at it straight on. You can see if one wall's steeper than the other, and you can just kind of turn it side to side. If you have a good camera on your phone, a lot of times I'll finish polishing a stone and I'll pull out my camera and take a video and I'll be like, oh, I missed that, you know? So a lot of times if you pull out your camera and take a little video of it, you can see any kind of little like quirks in it like that too. And you can zoom in pretty close. But now we're down to a nice flat straight wall, which we don't want because that is not very good for bezeling. And if you're going to put this in a piece of jewelry, you don't want basically a flat wall here. So we're going to take that. If we had drawn a 3/4 line, it probably would be gone now because we finished cutting the top. But if we had drawn a 3/4 line, we're basically going to go from ground zero up to the 3/4 line, and we're basically going to take out this straight edge, and we're going to bend it in a little bit. So you want this to angle in, and if you can imagine, if this is in a ring, right, and you got it, sorry, if you got that in a ring, you're going to want that to be held in by a bezel, right? A little wire, or not a wire, but a little thin piece of sheet, right? And so that's got to angle in, and you want that to angle in roughly at a like 25 to 35-degree angle. So what we're really going to do is basically cut from ground zero up to about maybe not 75% of the way up the stone, maybe 60%. We're really just trying to get that to angle in a little bit. And as we do that, we'll probably have to round the top a little more as well. So as you're cutting that in, every now and then, just kind of go back through over your top, because you want to try and keep it as even as possible while you're cutting. It saves you a lot of time at the end, and then if you have a really weird lump on one side and you try and cut that down and that's the only thing that's off, a lot of times you overcut it and then it looks lumpy afterwards. So you want to try and keep it as uniform as possible throughout your cutting process. And for this, we'll keep it at the 280 grit wheel. And then after that, after we get that kind of blended up and kind of in at an angle, we'll go ahead and move up to the 600 grit wheel, and we'll try and get rid of some of these lumps on here and make it a little bit more of a nice smooth cabochon. So back to the cutting wheel. Okay guys, this is where our cabochon is at now. We basically have taken away that center line, the original line that we had on there, and we've blended it up to basically your 3/4 line. And if you look at this now, you can see how it kind of angles up just a little bit, but it angles up on the edges. So when you are trying to bezel this, it will actually hold in there. Once you bend that bezel over, it'll just sit there and hold it nice and tight in a ring. This side on the right is a little steeper than the one on the left, but I'm moving up to the 600 grit wheel, which will still take it'll still take away some of the stone. And up until even the 1200, depending on how hard your stone is, even the 1200 grit will take a little bit of the stone away. You can still, but it's much harder to do once you hit the 1200. So we're going to go in on the 600 grit. Another thing is you do not want a sharp bottom edge, because a lot of times when someone puts a bottom plate in and then they put a bezel wire around a stone, sometimes that silver pools in the crevice from the bottom plate to the bezel. And if you put in one of these that has basically sharp edges, it'll chip because it's a rounded edge sometimes in the bezel. So it's best if you go in and just go around with your wheel, usually at the 600 grit. If you're working with a harder stone like an agate, I would suggest doing that at the 280 grit wheel. But basically you just run around and you want to dole out this edge. You kind of want to round it around. And that way it keeps it from chipping once they're trying to bezel it and breaking your stone, God forbid. And then also it just looks a little bit nicer. And sometimes the Sharpie that you put on here will absorb into the stone through little cracks and stuff. So it's a good way to get the Sharpie out of there too. But yeah, so we're going to move on to the 600 grit wheel. And I will round this out a little bit, probably sharpen this angle a little bit more. And then we will go on to the polishing stages. But you can see that we're starting to get a nice good shape from that. And after we do the 600 grit wheel, we'll pretty much just be on to the polishing stages to shine it up. Alright guys, this is where we are with our cabochon. We're moving on to the 1200 grit wheel, which is your polishing wheel. If you're just using a Dremel, you're probably going to want to try and get this as close to this shape as you can, and then use your polishing pastes and your felt wheel, and that'll get you up to this. But you can still see there's a few little lumps in there. That's what your 1200 grit wheel is going to get out of there, and it's going to clean that up a little bit more, just getting any of those weird little bends out of there. And then we'll go on to the 3000 grit wheel, which will just give it a really nice shine. So here we go. Alright guys, here's our finished product. The person who I made this video for had said they really liked high dome cabs, so that's what we made here. But you can see this technique would work for any dome size you want. If you want to do it a little lower, just make your bottom line a little lower. But then as you go through the process, you can see that makes it really easy to get a perfectly round stone. Good shape to it. You want to have those edges bent in just a little bit like they are, so you can put a bezel around there. And that should fit perfectly into a ring or a pendant.